Hey guys, it's Nemo and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to just read for you the prologue of a book that I've written. Now I started writing this book, The Chronicles of Avalonia, A Tale of Three Kings, when I was 17 years old. Now at 17 years old you don't have the same sort of life experience that I did when I was 29 and finished this book at 29. Now a couple of years later I've finally published it. So I finally published it this year in June. I thought about making a video of it earlier, but I wasn't too sure if I should. But you know, why not? Why not? So today what we're going to do is we're going to, as I said, read the prologue, and if you like it, I'll put a link in the description to where you can get the book. You can get the book on Amazon US under Chronicles of Avalonia. You can buy it in paperback, or you can buy it on ebook, whatever your preference is. So the basic idea behind this book is an alternative history of my own family. So it's set in a fantastical world that I have created over the years, and I think for my first book it turned out pretty well. It is the first book of a 2-book series. I have begun writing the second book, but it hasn't gone too far at the moment. I've had a pretty busy time in life lately. So anyway, let's get into the prologue of the Chronicles of Avalonia, A Tale of Three Kings. A draught of cold air crept up the hall and Lucius shivered. The coughs and splutters from the bedchamber across the bench he was seated on grew louder and more frequent. Voices came from within, although they were muffled. He leaned forward on his elbows and strained to hear, yet still could not make out any words. A violent cough and a scream of pain widened his eyes, and he sat back against the stone wall. For the last fortnight, physicians had been coming and going from the palace, all with different opinions, and all without a remedy. Barnir, his king and friend, had been bedridden for the better part of the fortnight, coughing up blood and pus and writhing in pain. Some of the senior physicians believed they had seen this illness before, but none dared diagnose the king for fear of being wrong. A stupid fear, thought Lucius. Heal the king and you won't lose your head, or attempt to heal the king and you still won't lose your head. Who do they think I am? He stood up and stretched. He had been sitting vigil by the door most nights and maintaining the politics of the kingdom by day. His eyes burned from tiredness, and he rubbed them as he decided to eat. It was not long till he was foraging through the kitchens of the palace. He scrounged up some bread and a small wedge of cheese with a skin of Lothian red wine, and sat himself at the servants' table. As he bit into his bread, he thought of his young king. As a youth, he remembered. Barney would run through the kitchens laughing and grabbing fistfuls of food while the cooks would yell after him. Lucius smiled to remember the glint in the dark brown eyes of the boy. The cheeky, wild lad had grown to become a king his people had loved. A generous man with a heart of gold and a love for his people no other king had ever had. Barney's reign had not been full of tales of victories or battles against foes. Peace and prosperity would be his legacy. Lucius knew that peace and prosperity were not the things that most recorded. Battles, wars, warriors and great heroic deeds were what history remembered. Lucius would remember, though. He took a swig of wine and gorged into the cheese wedge. The memory of the day Barney became king came to mind. Seeing the young 12-year-old lad being crowned brought a tear to his eye. Barney's father and mother, King Gemir and Queen Barabal, had perished when their return ship from the Isles sank in a storm. The young prince had only shed tears for a day. Lucius recalled the strength of the boy. he had shown in taking on the role of king. So much so that the Lord Steward had decided against a regency. The gold crown had reflected the sun radiantly on that day, as if all the gods of men had endorsed young Barney themselves. He had worn a black tunic with gold trimming and a belt of gold. Barney had chosen the colour to mourn his parents, yet he looked as regal as any monarch. His thick brown hair had sat on his shoulders, and the glint in his eyes was gone. Grim and dutiful he had been that day, 8 years past. The bread and cheese were gone. Lucius finished the skin of Lothian red and left it on the counter. He made his way out of the kitchens and up to the ballroom, passing stewards and guards along the way. The empty chamber swallowed his presence as he entered, his footfalls echoing off the walls and high ceiling. Old kings and recent monarchs lined the walls in life-size portraits, boring their eyes into him. Lucius exited through the open doors of the western side of the ballroom and onto the marble mezzanine overlooking the palace gardens. The air was fresh and a slight breeze blew across his face. It was the first time he had been outdoors in a week. His deep blue eyes scanned the gardens and beyond the walls and the rooftops and towers of Middenheim. His mind raced with memories of the young king playing at swords in the garden with the sons of his father's lords and chiefs. When Barney had become king, he walked to the fathers of his playmates through these gardens, brokering deals and keeping the peace between disputing lords. I had been gone too long, he thought as he turned and headed back the way he came. As he re-entered the ballroom, a tall knight approached him. As with Lucius, he was clad in the same royal blue surcoat trimmed with white over his mail, black high boots and a steel longsword hanging from his belt. The knight was solid in the arms and chest, as most men of war were, with thick fiery hair and blue eyes. "Lord Constable," Lucius said with a slight nod, "to what do I owe this pleasure?" "Many of the lords and their retinues have arrived. Most await you in the castle great hall across the city. Let us pray they are here in vain, that there is only good news to fill their ears." "Let's," said the Lord Constable as he and Lucius walked towards the king's chambers. The silence was deafening as the two knights arrived at the oaken bench that Lucius had sat upon earlier. Chain mail against timber had never sounded so loud when they both sat. Hours crawled by as neither said a word to the other, each waiting for a skerrick of information about their king. As it grew dark outside, the solid door of the bedchamber opened and a solemn-looking physician stepped out. "My Lord Steward," he said in a small voice, "the king, he—" The man hesitated as the words stuck in his throat. "He what?" said Lucius calmly. The physician did not speak, but beckoned the knights in as he returned to the dimly lit chamber. Lucius and the Lord Constable Onreg Steward entered behind him. Lucius's face was as stone as his eyes gazed upon the gaunt face of the king he had so loved. The boy was gone, as was the comely young man the boy had become. "Dead, sir," came the small voice of the physician. Lucius had seen enough death in his lifetime that he did not need the physician to tell him the king had passed. He bowed his head to the side and closed his eyes. Behind him came the words of the Lord Constable. "The king is dead. Long live the king." So that's the prologue of A Tale of Three Kings. One day I'll get around to finish writing the second book, which will finish off the two-book series. And as I said, if you're interested in reading the rest of the book, and hopefully you enjoyed what has already been read, I will put a link to the book on the Amazon US store in the description below. So anyway guys, thanks for joining me, and stay safe out there.